Hello friends, welcome to another video of me tinkering with code, and today I'm going to be tinkering with Microsoft Authentication Library for Python, or as it's commonly known, MSAL Python. And the motivation for this actually stems from my own problem. I was building Open Spartan Workshop, my Halo Infinite companion app, and as part of that work, I realized that one of the data points that I needed as I was looking at different players that I played with is how do I convert an Xbox Gamertag into what's known as an Xbox User ID, the XUID. So it should be a unique numeric identifier for a player that cannot be very easily visualized through existing tools. So I needed to try and look behind the scenes of how different applications do that. So today we're going to be looking at how I can use MSAL Python to get an access token with my Microsoft account, or if you have an Outlook or Live ID or Hotmail, one of those addresses, that's a Microsoft account. And I'm going to use that to get the access token and then convert that into an Xbox token that I can then use to talk to Xbox APIs to get the information that I need. So let's jump right into the code. I'm going to switch to my screen here, and I'm running this on Linux because who doesn't like a sample on hard mode? And Linux is fun. So I have the terminal here. I have Sublime Text, which is my editor of choice, and I have the Azure portal in the background. These are going to be our core tools for today. Before we start, I want to create a folder for my project. So I'm just going to do mkdir, and then let's see, what do we name it? We're going to call it XUID Resolver. And we're just going to do that, and then we're going to go into the folder. Now, what I want to do here now is create a Python virtual environment, and that allows me to isolate the application. So when I install the packages, I just install them in that particular folder and not globally for my system. So I'm just going to do python3 mven.env. This will spin up a new virtual environment in my folder, so I can now activate it. So I actually do source and then env bin activate. And we see .env now showing up next to my username and host. That means the virtual environment is activated and we can use it. What I want to do now is I want to create a new folder for my application itself. So I'm going to call it mkdir, and I'm going to call it XR. Just very simple, very easy to remember. And inside that XR folder, we can actually open it in Sublime here. So I'm just going to go open folder and go to documents, source, XUID Resolver, right? Because that's what we worked on. So we see our .env folder, the environment. We see the XR, which is going to be our folder for the actual application. And inside it, I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to save it as main UI. And this will allow us to run the application as a module. I will not get into kind of the depth of the Python logic for double underscores, but we're just going to save it as that. Great. So now we have the application. What we also want to do now is add the option here to install required packages. For me, there is only one required package that I need to install as a custom artifact, and that is MSAL. I mentioned we're going to be using MSAL Python. So what I want to do here is I'll create a new file in the root folder, and I'm just going to say MSAL. That's the name of the package that we want to install. And I'm just save this as requirements.txt. Perfect. So we have the package defined now. We only need MSAL. In my terminal now, I will go ahead and I will install the requirements. So we can use pip for that, the Python package manager. So we can do pip install R, and then pass the name for requirements.txt. And what will happen is MSAL and all the required dependencies are going to be automatically pulled in and installed. Great. We can now use this application here. Cool. Let's jump back to our Python code here. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier to read. What we want to do here is from MSAL, we're going to be using a class called public client application. A public client application is an application that runs on the desktop or a mobile or a web view where there is no ability to securely store a secret, right? The applicant, that's why it's a public client, because I cannot store anything in it securely, because the app can be reverse engineered. So if you ever include like a certificate or some kind of secret key in it, anybody with some tooling and enough time can extract it, right? So by default, they're public client applications. They do not hold secrets. A confidential client application, which is not the topic of this conversation, are the applications that can hold a secret securely. They run on a server and have basically no user can access them directly. So here we're going to be using a public client application. So I want to do from MSAL, we're going to import public client application. This is the class that basically allows me to authenticate with my Microsoft account and the API. The other class here that is going to be important for us to use, and I'll walk you through the importance of this in a second, is the cache. So what I want to do is once I log in, once I add my credentials, once I successfully get the token to the application, I don't want to be logging in every single time when the application or the script, Python script in this case, reruns. So I want to make sure that that's stored in the cache, and unless the token is expired, just use that. The beauty of MSAL too is that MSAL itself handles things like refresh of tokens automatically. So you as a developer, or you as a user, if you're running the script, don't need to worry about making sure that it's maintained. MSAL itself is proactively handling that for you. But long story longer, I'm gonna do add a comma and say serializable token cache, because that's what I want to use in my application, a serializable token cache, a file that's going to store my information once I authenticate, the access token, the refresh token, and so on. The piece that is missing here now is like, well, great, I want to log in. What's the first step? And the first step is we need a registered application in Microsoft Entra ID. A registered application effectively identifies you to the user who's going to be logging in with the script. So we're going to go to the Azure portal and go to Entra ID, and you can just search for Entra ID. You don't need a paid account for Azure, by the way, for this. You can use a completely free account. You can register an application by yourself. So I go to Manage, and I go to App Registrations. I logged in with my dummy Outlook.com account. You can do the same thing. And what we're going to do here is create a new registration. I'm going to call it XUID Resolver. And we only want access for personal Microsoft accounts. I don't really care about work and school for this one. It's just MSA, right? Like your Outlook, your Live.com, your Hotmail, all those accounts. And I'm running this as a public client, as I just mentioned. So I'm going to do public client and set the redirect URI to HTTP localhost. This is a client application, right? I'm writing a script. Same thing if you're running a desktop application. I want to make sure that it just redirects locally. There's no site it needs to redirect and pass the token to. This is the URI where once authentication is successful, the token is passed to. When you run this locally with, say, MSAL Python, what happens is behind the scenes, a new service is being spun up locally that listens to localhost. And so when the token returns, it passes it back to the application. So I'm just going to register this application as is. So XUID Resolver. And the one thing that is important here is that for the application, we will get what's known as a client ID. It's a GUID that uniquely identifies your application. It tells you who you are, right? So this is the application and client ID here. I'm gonna just zoom in so you can clearly see it. The application client ID, that's what we need. I'm gonna copy this to clipboard because that's what I want here. And what we want to do is store it somewhere. I can store it in the script. I can store it, of course, in the Python script directly as a variable, but I prefer actually using the environment variables. So I'm going to jump on over here to my terminal, and inside of it, terminal, I will say export. Let's do this. And then let's name the variable XR client ID. And then set the value to our GUID. And actually, like, I need to erase these extra characters. It's not correct. Okay, so just to confirm, 5CE is the start, 73A is the end. That matches what I have in the Azure portal. That is my application. So export XR client ID, that's gonna be our client ID. And then I press enter. The environment variable is now set. So what I can do here is, if I do echo XR client ID, I should get the client ID back. So we know that the variable is set. Great. In our Python script now, what I want to do is I want to read the environment variable. So I'll say client ID equals os.getEnv. This is the built-in capability that gets the environment variable. And I'm going to call it XR client ID. That's what we call it here, right? This is the XR client ID is the name of the variable. And here also I need to, of course, import OS because we're pulling the functionality, the .getEnv from the OS module. Okay, so we have this. Next thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that before we go into the whole authentication flow, I want to get the scopes. The scopes in OAuth flows basically define what level of access do you want to grant the user that's authenticating your application. In my case, I want the scopes to be the Xbox live sign-in and access to Xbox offline data. And there's two scopes for that already defined that exist on the Xbox services that we're going to be using here. So I'm just going to do scopes equals, and then it's going to be an array of strings. So here I'm just going to do Xbox Live.signin. That's one scope. And the other scope is Xbox Live.offline access. So these are the scopes. Next, I also want to add another variable here that is going to become useful later, and this is going to be the XBL API version for the token that we're going to be passing. So take a note of that. It's going to XBL version equals 3.0. Again, it's irrelevant what the version here is. It's more like you'll see where it's used later. And I want to set up the token cache path. The path where my file is going to be stored is going to be caching the authentication tokens that I got from the Microsoft authentication services. So I'm just going to say token cache path equals cache.bin. It's going to be a binary file, and I just want to call it cache.bin, and it's going to exist in the folder with the rest of my application, where the Python script is. Now, what we want to do here is instantiate the cache. So first, cache equals serializable token cache. This is going to be our point of reference for the the cache object or the cache container. Next, I will implement a little function here that will save the cache locally whenever the state changes, and you'll see where that's actually used. So we're going to create a new function. So def save cache. Again, standard Python conventions, right? Nothing new here. And here, if cache.has state changed, if the state changed, we write it to a file. So we use with open, not parentheses, open, and then token cache path. That's the path to the file, which is just cache bin. We write it. So we add the W here as token cache file. And then token cache file dot write, and then cache dot serialize. Right. So if the state changed, write the file, serialize the cache, just dump it in my binary file. That's kind of it. That's the serialization logic here. Next, now we're going to getting a little bit more into kind of the helper functions that we'll need. But before we get there, let's maybe start working through the requirements that we have for the public client application that I mentioned. Me just logging in with my Microsoft account and getting the data that I want. So first, before I do that, I want to make sure that I add one more thing here, and that is at exit dot register save cache. So we have a trigger for the cache saving logic, right? So and of course, before we do that, we need to make sure that we import the module. So we're going to do import at exit. All right, so we're going to jump back to the code here. And what I want to do now is initialize my public client application with MSAL. Let's do this. MSAL makes it very easy because you don't actually need to write a lot of the code. A lot of times when I talk to folks about using different authentication APIs, they think they need to use the REST calls. They need to do the whole dance of like, how do I authorize the user, get the token, pass the token? You don't need to do this with MSAL. It's literally a few lines of code. And especially MSAL Python is abstracting out the complexity for your Python code that you do not need to use any custom logic for authenticating a user. We handle that ourselves. So here I'm going to do app equals public client application. Let's make sure that we get the case correct. And here, what we need to pass first is the client ID, right? That's the one that we just registered in Azure portal. So we're going to do client ID. Next, we set the authority, and that is, what's the authority for the authentication? And the authority here is HTTPS login.microsoftonline.com. And you probably don't need to see my face. I'm just going to switch to the monitor. / and here it's just consumers, because we're logging in with just Microsoft accounts, MSA accounts, right? They're not work and school, so it's just consumer. And then token cache equals cache. This is the cache that we just created before. So if we look back at our code, I'm gonna just erase this. So if we look back at our code here, the serializable token cache, here when I instantiate the public client application, I make sure that I tell MSAL, hey, by the way, make sure that you use the cache that I've already created there, that there's a serializable token cache. We will use it to make sure that the account information is stored, and then I don't have to re-authenticate every time I run the script. So let's look at the code again. Next, what we want to do is acquire the token, right? To acquire the token, first, I'm going to try to get accounts, the accounts that exist in the cache. So I'm going to do accounts equals app, which is my public client application, dot get accounts. This should generally pull accounts from the cache and find out if there's anything that is already authenticated. Next, I'm going to do result equals none, and this is going to be the container for our authentication result once I go through the dance of actually getting the token. So let's check if accounts has anything in it, right? So here I'm going to do if accounts. If there is something there, let's try logging in with the very first account. I know this is a very simplified version, if you will, and I'm actually going to move here a little bit so it's easier to see. And what we want to do is, as we check for accounts, if there's any accounts here, we can print and say accounts exist in cache. Okay. And we don't need the from here. And result equals app.acquired token silent. What this means is the application, the MSAL, will try to silently get the token from the cache without prompting the user with any interactive web views or popping them into the browser, because they can just get the token silently, hopefully if it's correctly set up in the cache. And if the token is expired or there's a new policy that requires the user to re-authenticate, they of course will have to re-authenticate. So acquire token silent, and then we pass the scopes, which are the Xbox scopes that I mentioned earlier. And then account equals accounts at index 0, because it's an array. And also I don't need the semicolon here because we're not writing C#. Now, here, this is a simplified version because I'm just assuming that the first account is the account that I want. Like there's better logic that you can write, but this, for demo purposes, this is okay. So we're gonna hop on over here and say, but if the accounts is not populated, there's nothing in the cache, we'll say else print no accounts in the cache. And then the result equals app.acquire token interactive with the same scopes. At this point, we didn't find a token in the cache. So we want to make sure that we interactively pop the view and ask the user to log in, because clearly they need to provide their credentials. Okay, that's the logic for MSAL. That's it. That's all you need to do to authenticate a user and get that access token from their Microsoft account. But remember, for us, it's not just the MSA that we want. We want to make sure that there is a way for us to check the Xbox API. Before we do that, let's do a sanity check here and make sure that we've done things the right way. So we can check if there is a token, right? Because ultimately, we want to make sure that there's something in there once the authentication completed. I'm not going to show you my token, but I'm just going to write this very simple logic here. If result, so if the result actually is not null, and access token in result, print, we have a token. So I'm not actually going to print the token to the screen, but I'm just going to try and say that, hey, if the token is there, just point me something in a terminal. So let's jump back to a terminal. I'm going to clear this. And what I'm going to do here is run the application. I'm going to do Python m xr. Right? I'm just going to run it as a module. The XR, the XUID resolver module that I just was showing you earlier. I'm going to run this. And what's going to happen is, because I've never used this application before, remember, we registered XUID resolver for the very first time on this demo. This app is now requesting access. So XUID resolver, the application that we registered, that's matching the name and Entra ID, by the way, right? The application. Unverified, because I have not verified. This is just a simple dummy app. Access your Xbox Live information anytime. Xbox Live profile. These are the scopes that we've defined, right? These are the scopes that we specified at the beginning of the script. So that's fine, right? Like, so we accept. We say, sure. Let this app access my data. Authentication completed. I can close the window. Great. And if I go to the terminal, I now see we have a token. So we successfully acquired a token from Microsoft Services to authenticate the user. That's it, right? So like, if you're writing an application, you don't need to worry about storing client secrets. You don't need to write REST APIs. Like what we just wrote in MSAL Python, that's kind of it. It's that simple. It's that easy. The next step here is we actually want to make sure now to talk to the Xbox APIs and exchange that access token for the Xbox tokens that we need. The logic there is a little bit more convoluted. And because we're doing this as a hobby application, we're going to create our functions ourselves. So first, what we want to do is we want to request the user token. For that, the Xbox has a separate API. So I'm going to do request user token. And for the record, this API is not done through MSAL. Like we're writing the REST call here. There is no wrapper for me to leverage, right? The access token is the easy part. Now it's becoming a little trickier. So request user token. And we're going to pass an access token into it that we got from MSAL Python, right? Here, I'm going to construct a JSON body that I will send to the request. So I'm going to do ticket data equals, and part of this JSON, I need to specify several properties. So there's a relying party, and that relying party should be http auth.xboxlive.com. Right, token type. And this is going to be a JWT token or the JSON web token. Actually, it's redundant. It's JWT. It's not JWT token. So JWT. And then properties. And for our properties, we have a few others. One is auth method, which is going to be RPS. It doesn't really matter. This is beside the point of what RPS is. But we're going to look at site name. And this is user.auth.xboxlive.com. And lastly, RPS ticket. And here we use the access token that we just got from MSAL. So, well, we're going to be passing into this function, but D equals access token. I'm going to interpolate the string here. All right, so we have this. We have the body constructed for the ticket data. Now we also want to set some headers. So we're going to be passing them. And for that, we're going to declare a new JSON blob. So they're going to be headers equals. And here we have a header XXBL contract version. And the value of this header is 1. I also realize that I'm mixing double quotes with single quotes. Like, it's not a good practice. Try to keep it consistent, but for now it's fine. And then content type application /JSON. All right, so we have the headers now, and now we can construct the actual request. So we can do response equals requests. And for this, by the way, for requests, I got to make sure that I add it from the very beginning. So we need import requests. It's an important module to have if you want to do requests here. So requests dot post. This is a post call, right? Like not get. Make sure that you're using post. And I'm going to move the window here. Dot post. And what are we posting exactly? Well, first we specify the URL, which is going to be the Xbox live service URL, and this is going to be HTTPS user.auth.xboxlive.com/user/authenticate. That's the URL. Next, we want to pass kind of the JSON that we're passing. So JSON equals, actually, I'm going to put on a new line here because why not? Easier that way. JSON equals and ticket data. This is the blob, not token, it's ticket. This is the blob that we had here, right? Like this is the relying party and all this information. We're passing it to the call. So ticket data, and then headers equals headers. This is the blob right here. These are the headers that we're passing, right? And then what we want to do is if response status code equals 200. Actually don't need the parentheses here. Return response.json. So this, oh, actually, I'm going to do import JSON. I think I'm missing that. So if the request is successful, if we have a HTTP 200, great, just give us back whatever you just got. Otherwise, return none. Okay, that's the logic for us getting the user token from Xbox. That's kind of it, right? So we use the access token that we got through MSAL Python authentication with our public client. We're passing it into this JSON blob, and that's going to be the body of the request. We're setting the headers correctly, and then we're just requesting the data from the service by sending that off on the wire. Right, so that's kind of it. But user token is not all. We also need the token from what's called the XSTS service. So we need an XSTS token. And for that, there's going to be a function that's going to be very similar to what we just did. And I'm just going to show you this and save us time, I'm just going to copy this. Request user token, right? And I'm going to rename this to request XSTS token. And instead of passing the access token here, I'm going to be passing the user token. Because the user token that we just got from Xbox is going to be the token that we're going to be using. Then the body of the request is going to be a little bit different. So it's going to be the relying party is going to be Xbox Live. Token type still stays JWT. But here now, auth method, RPS, none of this is relevant. So we can just safely delete it. And I'm going to say user tokens. And then this is an array, and I'm going to say user token. And sandbox ID equals to retail. Again, a lot of these values, not important. This is just how the API works, and this is going to be a good demo. Contract version is 1, content type application.json, nothing changes. Response, we still want to do a post here, but the URL is going to be different. So it's going to be xsts.auth.xboxlive.com/xsts/authorize. The rest doesn't really change. So we still want to make sure that if the request succeeds, it gives us 200, give us back whatever data you got, give us the JSON blob that's going to contain the token. Otherwise, return none. Great. We have the token pieces in place, right? The last piece, or I don't want to say the last piece, there's a little bit more work that we need to do, but is actually passing the token that we got from Xbox and getting the data about the user. How exactly do we do that? Well, we construct a whole new function for that. We call it search for user. For that, I'm going to create a new function here. Let's scroll this a little bit so it's easier to see. Def, as is Python for definition of a function, search for user. And then we take a gamer tag as an argument, and then the token, which is going to be the token that we got, the XSTS token combined with some, I'll show you in a second, the more data to get the Xbox token that we need for this call, that will be used to get the information for the users. And here we need to specify a few headers that are going to be different than what we saw before. So headers equals, here we're going to do XBL contract version, and contract version for this API is 3. Next, content type, no surprises there. It's going to be application.json or /JSON. Okay. And authorization. Familiar header if you've ever worked with bearer tokens before. But in this case, it's not going to be quite a bearer token in the traditional sense. Like you're not appending bearer and then the token. It's going to be a little different, you'll see. And we pass the token here that we pass to the function. And then accept language en-us. Okay. Those are the headers. The URL for the API call that we want here is going to be dynamically constructing and accounting for the gamer tag. So F here is going to be HTTPS peoplehub.xbox/users/me/people/search/decoration. It's very, very, very convoluted. Like I told you before, like there's a bit of a dance here to do, but that's okay. So decoration/detail, and then preferred color, and then we've add Q equals gamer tag. This is going to be our query, right? We're querying for that specific gamer tag, and specify max items equals 25. Just return us 25 results tops. That's the function or the URL that we actually need here. So it's a little bit convoluted, and I want to make sure that here that S is proper casing. So okay, we have the URL specified. What next? Well, now we just need to get the data. So I'm just going to do response equals request dot get. So previous request for Xbox APIs, we were posting. Now we're just getting. So we do get, and then URL, and then headers equals headers. The headers that we just specified here, like this blob right here. Okay. And then same way as we've done before, I'm just going to copy this snippet here and paste here. If response is 200, give us back the JSON blob. If not, return none. That's kind of it. And what I want to do next is add a little bit of a convenience function for myself, because we're going to get a whole bunch of data from this kind of search for users once we actually pass the right information to it. I want to make sure that the data is presentable on the screen. To do that, I'll create a new function. Our trend of this video is we just create functions for everything. So def get gamer tags, right? And then we pass the data. We're like, what's the JSON data we're going to get in gamer tags from? And here we are going to check for JSON properties in the data. So the way Xbox returns you that data is going to be in a people object inside or people property inside the JSON blob. So if people in data, if that data actually exists, right? We're going to print And I want to do some formatting magic here, and we want to make sure that we set the proper spacing and ensure that once things pop on the screen, they're actually readable and you don't have to like jump around different lines. So we're gonna make sure that it looks good, right? And then that, and we do dot format and Gamertag and do it. Okay, so this is gonna be our header here. So we're gonna make sure that we show the right. Oh, actually, I don't need the closing parenthesis here. It should be like this. This will be our header, and then we're gonna also print in a typical style of a console application some empty dashes. So we're just gonna do dash times 30. 30 dashes is good. And then for every person, because once we search for a gamer tag, it can return more than one result, right? Like once you search for, I don't know, like a random name, it might show you a few that start this way or Xbox things are similar. So we're gonna make sure that we parse through them. So for person in data people, so we look through each person here and we say gamer tag equals person dot get, and then we say gamer tag. And if that's not available, we say unknown gamer tag. Next, we say XUID. Similar to the previous line, we say person.get XUID. And if there's no such property, we say unknown XUID. Although I have not seen that be the case in APIs yet, so that's fine. And then here we say print. And similar to what I've done before in this format here, I'm just going to copy and paste it. No need to replicate this from scratch. And once again, I mix double quotes and single quotes. Do not do that if you can. And instead of these pre-baked values here, I'm just going to say gamer tag and XUID, right? So all this function does is just outputs the content of the JSON blob that we got into the screen in a readable format. Okay, so we're going to save this now. How do I actually get the gamer tag passed into the script? For that, we'll need to do a little bit of argument parsing from the very beginning, right? So I'm just going to scroll right up to the script, top of the script. And after our cache initialization, I'm just going to add another line that says target gamer tag. And this target gamer tag is going to be our first argument. Okay. And then let's make sure that we check the length of the argument. So if there's actually an argument passed, that we need to make sure that it's there, equal, okay, so it's 1. And then else, if the argument is not there, what do? Well, we can default to something, and something I'm going to use a dummy gamer tag that I use for my test accounts. Don't add it as friends because it's literally used for my own tinkering. It's not an active account. So we're going to save this. And for this, I actually also need to import the sys module. I totally forgot. All right. So because we're calling sys.argv, and we want to make sure that sys is actually a thing that we have here. Okay. So now we have it in a kind of decent shape, right? So we've done the logic here to get the token with MSAL Python, our token for my MSA account. Then we've implemented the logic for getting a user token from Xbox with the proper configuration. We've built the logic to get the XSTS token to get kind of the next step from the Xbox API. And then we've also built the logic for searching the users through the Xbox API itself that is designed to return gamer tags. And we've built a helper function that allows us to very easily render things on the screen in a readable format. Great. So we've done the heavy lifting. So now we just need to assemble it all together and make sure that it works, right? So we're going to scroll back here. So remember when we did the access token trick and see like we have a token. So after this line, what we do next is we want to request the Xbox user token. So I'm going to say ticket equals request user token, right? And here we pass result and then access token. We're requesting a user token based on the access token that I just got with MSAL Python. Next, if ticket, so if we actually got a ticket in return, right? I want to do this. It's a user token. equals ticket dot get, and then the value is token. I'll make sure to capitalize the T, because this is the format of the structure that Xbox returns us. So we get the token from it. Next, we want to do is identify the unique user hash or UHS property in the API result, and the resulting kind of token. And it's part of display claims. And for that, we can, again, parse it very easily. So we say user hash equals ticket dot get, and we look at the display claims property. And then if not, then just give us blank. And next, we want to get, and we say the XUI for every user that returns a specific value. It's captured in the XUI property. And then, well, we actually defaulted to empty array. Okay. And then we also get the UHS, which is the user hash, right? So we just do get and then UHS. Okay. So now we are in good shape here. We can get the user hash. Let's now get the XSTS ticket. So XSTS ticket, or the XSTS token in this case. The ticket contains the token and all the other information. But we'll get the ticket first. So ticket equals request XSTS token. And then we say user token. And the user token is what we just got here, right? Like we take the token from the first leg of the Xbox token exchange when we pass it on to the second one. So we get the user token. And then next, if the XSTS ticket was actually successfully acquired, so XSTS ticket. So in Python, it's very easy to check, right? Like if object, and then that means that the object is not null. If the object is not null, then XSTS token equals, and we parse it out of the XSTS ticket. So XSTS ticket dot get, and then we once again use a token property here. Perfect. And now the XBL token, this is what we're going to be using for that API, right? Like when I told you here that search for users, the authorization token is going to be a very specific construct. This is it. This is the moment of truth. So XBL token equals as a very specific format. And it's going to be, again, once we get comfortable with string interpolation, we use it everywhere. So it starts with XBL. Then we include XBL version. Remember, that's 3.0 that we had from the very beginning of the script. If we scroll all the way up, this one here, we use that version here when we construct the token. So XBL version is 3.0. So we just use that. I mean, you can just use it directly here, but it's easier for me to just define them separately. And then there is X equals, and then we interpolate with the user hash. Right? And then we pass the XSTS token, not the user token, XSTS token. Because if you use the user token, you'll know very, very quickly that you screwed up because you're going to get a 401 unauthorized. That's by design, right? You need to use the XSTS token, the second leg here. So once you have this, now we can actually search for the data. So user data, data equals search for users. And then we say target gamertag and XBL token. This is the token that we've constructed here containing the user hash and the XSTS token. So we pass that into the function, and that will append it to the header that we then pass to the search API. And target gamertag is what we read from the parameters of the script, right? So very, very easy. And then, so if user data was successfully acquired, so if user data get gamertags, user data. That's it. That's the script. So if the user data is obtained, we pass it into the get gamertags function that will actually just effectively pre-print. It will show it on the screen very concisely and in a way that is readable. And let's make sure that we did not screw up anything. So we have all the imports. We set up the client ID. We went to the terminal before and we kind of set the client ID there. So remember, the default here is going to be bread Kurtek. That's going to be the gamer tag for my test account that is going to be showing up if I don't pass any argument here. So let's try and run this and see if we mess something up in the code. So I'm just going to run it. No, it counts in the cache. So it looks like, yep. I'm definitely trying to sign in with Resolver. Let's close this. Let's go here. List has no attribute. Get. And that is because I totally forgot here that there could be several user IDs. So we want to do index 0 once again. So let's make sure that we save this. Okay. Let's now run it once again. All right. And looks like the cache needs some reconfiguration. We'll get to that in a second once we actually validate. But looks like we did not correctly also configure the URL. So let's double check. The name resolution somewhere is wrong. And that is because in the code here, I messed up and wrote X instead of S. So it should be XSTS. Okay, so we're gonna save it again. Let's try it again. Run the code, we authenticate, continue. We can now close these and go to the terminal. Then request and define, because we probably messed up and said request instead of request. So okay, let's go back here. Okay, so search for user. All right, search for user. Yeah, so requests. There we go. Now it should hopefully run it. We go again. We authenticate, continue, of course. We close it. And then there we go. I got the XUID. I got the Gamertag. I got the XUID. I can type in any other Gamertag here because, again, it defaulted to bread Kurtek because I did not specify a custom one. But remember, we parsed the arguments. So I can do another one that says zbond, which is my main Gamertag. I'm going to say enter. And then we're going to see in a second like where we messed up with the cache. But if I continue, go back to the terminal, I can see it here. Fantastic. So this works. This actually works properly now. Let's take a look back to the cache. So I mentioned that it's good when we store the tokens locally and then we don't need to re-authenticate every single login, right? So the cache is our culprit here. So something did not quite work well. So we're going to go back here and say token cache equals cache, right? So we cache it correctly. And I realize here that what we actually did not add is the token deserialization, right? So here, after the registration, what I do is once the application starts, read the file and populate the cache. So we're going to do if os.path.exists. And we have the token cache path here, which is defined earlier. Remember, that's the cache.bin file. That's from the very, very beginning here, cache.bin. So we're going to go back and say if this exists, the token cache path, then we want to read it from disk. And to do that, we do with open and then token cache path, right? So then we use it for read access. That's why the R. As token cache file. And we do cache.deserialize. And then we pass the token cache file itself. And we read it, of course. Right? That's it. That's the logic for deserialization of the cache. So let's save it now. Let's go back to the terminal. And let's look again. Look at that. It didn't prompt us to log in. So if I go here and say, I don't know, bread Kurtek, because I want to specify it myself. Once again, I did not log in. The tokens were used from the cache, and now I successfully can query the XUIDs based on the Gamertag. As you can see, there's a little bit of a complication when you come to the conclusion that you need to work with Xbox APIs because, especially as a hobbyist, a lot of these are not documented. But that's okay because we can just look at the existing requests and use those. MSAL, on the other hand, ensures that things like cache serialization and using tokens is very, very easy and convenient, and you don't need to write the flow of, well, how do I pop the web browser and then pass information from the web browser back to the application? So again, very straightforward, very streamlined, and hopefully looking at this now, you're excited to try MSAL Python yourself. Thank you for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, make sure you leave a comment, and also check out the links that point you to resources where you can learn more about MSAL. You can learn more about Open Spartan Workshop that I just mentioned earlier. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot more videos coming in the future.